Warning, Supernatural The Crossroads contains adult language and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not continue to listen.
Oh, Dad. Oh, Dad. Oh, Dad.
I went to the crossroads. Well, I'm on my
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Supernatural The Crossroads. Post-Series 2021 is the new subtitle to our show here. A little mini spin-off sequel. I don't really know, but that's something we're trying. I am your host, Thomas Cowley. Joined with me, I've got Ryan Denton.
Fuck yeah.
Doing some porn voiceover or something like that.
Fuck yeah.
And Michael Flores.
Hi.
And he's the producer he's the guy behind the camera, apparently.
What was that voice?
I don't know. It's my cute voice.
That's your cute
Hold on.
voice.
That's not cute. Hi.
This is my cute voice.
That's not cute.
No, it sounds...
Oh.
Never mind.
Sounds like a Smurf did helium.
Mm.
All right. So this episode is going to be a little bit different than other things we've done because we do live in a post-series world, which is a sad, dark place compared to where we all once were. But, you know, we're trying our best to live and adapt to the situation we find ourselves in.
We've had to resort to drug use.
A little bit to
Like,
stay
on those nights where Supernatural used to air, I find myself looking for a vein.
Mm-hmm.
I typically let my vein... I have a vein that gets larger, but that's you know...
You inject into that vein?
I use that vein to inject into other
So
stuff.
you use a vein to inject.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I find I cry myself to sleep less
Oh,
as time has gone on.
That's dark.
Yeah. I see what you're doing there. Okay.
Jesus Christ.
All right. So in the previous episode, we returned for the second half of our podcast season with an RPG session, which was, as they've been, graphic, chaotic, overly sexual, and disturbing.
And a bit dumb.
And a bit dumb. So go check that out if you haven't. But with this, we officially start the first of a 6-part series, our 2021 post-series discussion, where we're going to take a nuanced look at something far more serious, which I know, please don't leave just yet, but...
I promise, guys, there will be dick and fart jokes.
There will be dick and fart jokes. That is a guarantee. Ryan is here.
Anywhere.
But we're actually going to be talking about the direction of Jensen Ackles and how he directed the episodes of Supernatural. When what we're trying to do is look at how he did it. Is there a unique style to his work? And really break this down in a different way that I don't think many people are accustomed to or aware of or even look for.
Well, because we are not even sure if Jensen has a definitive style. And that's the reason. Now, we know he's good, and we know that the episodes he directs are quite good. But that doesn't mean every director has a signature style. So the goal of this series of discussions, where we're going to break down all of Jensen's episodes, we want to look for recognizable techniques that could be identified as defining markers of his technique or his style.
Now, so with that, some people may not know exactly what we're talking about with style, but basically the short version is you kind of know a J.J. Abrams movie, a Spielberg movie, a Ridley Scott movie by how they look when you see it. There's
a lens flare.
There's a distinct visual style to some of what they do, or they're very particular about lighting, or they're particular about how they tell the story through their directing, through the blocking, through the camera work.
Yep.
And some people have very specific things that they've developed over the years. J.J. Abrams in the lens flare is a internet meme level version of understanding this, but it is accurate. It is true. And it can be things that are more obvious, like the way a scene is between two characters is blocked out. And by that, we mean where they're standing, what's the pacing, where they move, how things physically happen within the space.
And what's the level of intimacy between
Right.
the two.
Hopefully very intimate.
And there's the dick and fart joke.
Yep. We're getting there. That was a subtle one. You didn't have to tell them. They got it.
So that's one aspect that can be very easily. One example that I learned about in film school of this kind of style is Spielberg's The Gaze, where you have throughout all of his movies, he has his characters stare in wonder off to something off screen.
Okay, yeah.
Like, welcome to Jurassic Park.
That has it. E.T. has it. Close Encounters is like the whole last half hour is just that. like it really is, you know. But it's something about how he perceives the world and what he's trying to get across in his films. And his films are a lot about wonder and
amazement.
Amazement.
Yeah.
That's the fucking perfect
Wait,
word.
Jurassic Park isn't real?
No, it's real.
Oh, fuck yeah.
So that's a good example. But they can also be other things like typical types of settings, or how, like I would say Tim Burton is great.
Settings.
Well,
Example
all
of
his sets,
settings.
everything looks the same. What
Distorted,
about like
weird, surreal.
A technical term for that would be the mise en scène. Or mise en scène, which
Yeah, so
includes
you gotta get French with it.
which is everything in that frame. And that is a perfect way to define a Tim Burton film. He uses the mise en scène to let people know, hey, look, this is my world I've created.
This is a Tim Burton film you're watching. Props, themes,
I'm gonna use that word.
You know, various other things can be all a part of a director's particular style. And it is true that some of this may not all be on the director specifically. Some of these things will fall on the shoulders of other members of the team and the production team. Most probably production design, set design, things like that, costumes and various looks. But most very, very prominent directors have some semblance of style to them. And I don't want this to sound shitty, but I would say more average or run-of-the-mill directors are just kind of putting the episode together and getting through the event.
When it comes to television specifically, like
Yeah.
with movies, directors are going to definitely impose a lot more of their style.
It's a lot more weight as a director for a film versus television.
Yeah, and not every director has a signature style. When I say signature style, typically I mean a tour style. That's someone like Tim Burton. That's someone like Quentin Tarantino. People that have a way of saying something within their work. Now, typically television doesn't allow for that, for the director to do that.
Yeah.
Some TV shows do, and that's part of what we're going to do with this discussion on Jensen, because as you mentioned, you know, many of these elements that we're talking about, they might not fall on the shoulders of Jensen himself or the directors of TV. And as you said, specific production team is where they may rest. But we are going to dissect these episodes and see if Jensen's style dictates or imposes a quality that other episodes do not. Is there something being done in every single episode that Jensen directs that is not being done typically
by the other episode's directors?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you made a good point when it comes to TV, especially with something like Supernatural. The production design, set design team, and even maybe the cinematography is probably more akin to that signature style because they're part of every episode, every season, whereas directors are fly by night, come as you go. I mean, Jensen himself did 6 episodes over 10 years almost.
Yeah.
That's not something that everyone who's on the production team was doing every episode.
Right.
You know, so some of that falls into their wheelhouse. But
Yeah, typically the ones who control the look of a TV show is, of course, the showrunner and the cinematographer or the camera department, because they're the ones that are dealing with everything day in, day out. And the directors are more of leadership. You know, they help do little things here and there, but they can't really impose too much of their style because it can break the show. They're not here every single day of production. But there are directors that do find their ways of doing just that, imposing their style. For one, that stands out on Supernatural is Richard Speight.
Yeah.
His first 4 episodes that he directed, you could tell they were directed by him. He had a very specific style, and he imposed his vision on that episode. Now, the only reason why he was able to do that is because the way the episode was written allowed him to impose that style. He didn't take a regular episode that dealt with the main myth arc and decided to fuck it up with his own idea or visual look when it comes to imagery. He was able to take his style and put it into episodes where it did work without breaking.
Yeah. So this, as we said, is going to be a little bit different. We're kind of going into this blind because we don't know if Jensen has. We haven't really discussed it a lot.
We haven't. We tend to like his episodes, but we've never actually sat down and analyzed his episodes
outside of our traditional episode breakdown. As a whole. How does it work? Breakdown, not him as a director work. So this will be a little bit different to see if we can determine, does he have a signature style? And with that, we're not necessarily reviewing these episodes in the traditional way that we've done it before. We're looking for specific stylistic choices and how he puts an episode together, not necessarily the quality of the episode's writing, narrative itself.
We're not imposing our review critique glasses on. We're putting on our critical analysis glasses, which are 2 very different things.
You keep them in different cases.
And that's why Ryan has already fallen asleep.
Yep.
I mean, like, I'm saving my good questions for the bulk of the discussion. Thank you very much. I do actually have questions. But yes,
I like how he has questions.
I do. Well, I don't know what the fuck I'm trying to talk about here.
I'm a listener in this episode.
So I'm basically.
I love you guys. I'm a fan.
He's the audience insert.
So all you guys that are dozing off during this but you're very, very, supportive of us and you listen to us all the time. I'm here for you. I feel you. I'm in the studio almost dying, but I am going to ask some good questions, the real hard-hitting questions, like, do you think Jensen gets a pee break during his, directing, or does he, how does that work? Is the director's seat comfortable? The things that
does he ever fart while he's directing?
Does he ever fart? Like, does he have to do a take?
I think it says a lot that not only is Ryan alluding to the fact that people would literally rather die than listen to these kind of discussions, but also that we desperately need him at times. So that's an interesting little sample
look,
of our show.
I don't want to brush my own shoulder off here.
He said brushing his shoulder?
Yeah. Well, I thought we might be on video, so that's why I did that.
Everyone needs a helping hand.
Everyone needs a
I don't want to brush my own shoulder off. But I'm doing it.
But
as I say that.
As if that's
a
phrase.
Point out,
it's to your own horn.
I just want to point out that some of the highest rated shows on this network and on this Supernatural podcast are my month of just complete debauchery. So, look, we've got to slow down the smut a little.
We've been on it for a while.
Yeah, we've been on some smut for a while. So I'm bearing with you. I promise I will not fall asleep. I might doze off. It's kind of one of those.
Those are the same thing.
No, I mean, I won't fall asleep. I'm not going to hit REM. I'm not going to hit REM sleep. Okay,
there you go.
Yeah,
there's the distinction.
Had to get the medical diagnosis.
I didn't pick up on it until Thomas said it. Those are the same things.
No, just
Christ
one of these isn't falling asleep. But
I'm not falling asleep, but I'm dozing off.
Yeah.
All right. So before Ryan completely passes out, which apparently is also different, the 6 episodes that we're going to be talking about.
I'm not going to pass out, but I am going to be unconscious.
That's REM sleep. REM sleep, REM sleep's different than unconscious. Unconscious means you just knocked out, So,
okay.
Whatever,
so the 6 episodes that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks are Weekend at Bobby's, The Girl Next Door, Heartache, Soul Survivor, The Bad Seed, and Atomic Monsters. All episodes directed by Jensen. So we are starting this week with the chronological first one, Weekend at Bobby's, broadcast in 2010, episode 4, season 6, which was shockingly...
What do you mean shockingly?
At the time, perfectly made sense. Post-series, shocking. But this one was written by Andrew Dabb and Daniel Laughlin.
Probably like 96% Daniel Laughlin.
Well, we've made the distinction before. We've talked, I don't want to get into writing a whole lot on this, but we talked a lot about those two were a powerful team.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Andrew has great ideas. It's the execution that would falter, and Daniel clearly was the anchor to that.
Or just the one who could write cohesively. Meaning, when you have a writing team, doesn't mean both can write the hell out of a script. It means one might just be a great story guy with all the ideas, and then the other person takes those ideas,
puts it into practice,
and adapts those words into screenplay format and makes it work. It does make you wonder, though, what would have happened if Daniel Laughlin never left, and Andrew Dabb and Daniel Laughlin, being the writing powerhouse that they were for many years, the two of them became the showrunners.
Well, we'd probably still be talking about new episodes.
Oh, fuck. I didn't even think about that. I was just saying that we would have had a lot stronger seasons towards the end.
Or there wouldn't be an end.
Both. I genuinely think we'd have had stronger episodes to this day, and we'd still be going.
Because I can't name one bad episode that Andrew Dabb and Daniel Laughlin wrote together. They're all pretty fucking strong.
Yeah.
And some of our favorite episodes, to be completely honest.
Weekend at Bobby's, for example.
And the Gods Hammer, or Hammer of the Gods.
Hammer of the Gods,
fucking one of my all-time favorite episodes.
Yellow Fever. It's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're not going to get into that.
No, that's another discussion.
That's a whole other discussion for when we get to that retrospective. But with this, we're going to go into a couple of terms that we want to give a little bit of context for. So each episode, every film, every episode of television has different levels to it, different levels of meaning. And I think anybody who's been listening to the show long enough kind of gets what we're going to be talking about here, where there's the surface level, what's happening. That is referred to as referential meaning, which the referential meaning is the surface level, the summary of the plot, the most simplistic interpretation. Hero, villain, Death Star, Empire, that kind of thing. Beyond that is a lot of what we talk about in our deep dives and our breakdowns.
We very rarely talk about referential meaning because, for an example, an episode like this, Weekends at Bobby's, would be we get an inside or behind the scenes look at Bobby's work as a hunter.
Yeah.
While he's trying to get his soul back.
What does Bobby do every day while Sam and Dean are off hunting?
That's the reverential meaning. But then there are other levels of meaning that require a more closer look at what's being said. And if you're a good writer, and all of the writers in Supernatural for the most part do put more meaning within each episode. Not all TV shows do. A lot of, CSI is probably geared
purely
more to
referential meaning.
Yeah.
For the most part. So beyond that, though, there is explicit meaning. Explicit meaning is a deeper level about what one would expect to find a film's message or moral or point to be about. For example, the change that a character goes through is an example of explicit meaning. Luke's journey from farm boy with dreams of the stars to hero of the Rebel Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And the change that he goes through, that, standing up for what's right and doing things that are tough when anyone else would run away. Some of the story meaning that is explicitly stated without actually someone saying, you're the hero, Luke, and you've changed a lot over the course of this last, 2 to 3 weeks.
That sounds just like Obi-Wan.
Yeah. Or another example would be like, let's say you have an episode of Full House back in the 80s and the sisters all steal money from their father.
Right.
And at the end of the episode,
Uncle Jesse sits him down.
Yeah. And the lesson is you don't steal. That's the explicit meaning of the episode. That's the moral or the point.
You got it, dude.
Wow. I just put that together.
I was waiting for someone to
It's been a while.
I knew exactly, but I wasn't going to give you anything.
It's been a while.
I was going to make you work for the laugh.
Wow. I thought that was a good.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to say good.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Well, what line is like from Full House could I have said?
An appropriate callback is what I'd say. It was.
Oh.
Yeah. There you go. You were saying?
So the implicit meaning is the third level of meanings in film or TV, and it's more abstract and below the surface than explicit meaning. Implicit meaning affords more room for disagreement and competing claims, which is something we do a lot on this show. In fact, that's probably what we do the most when we break down episodes. We are about breaking that implicit meaning, the unsaid, the things within the subtext.
There's a good example of that for the season finale of season 2. There's a moment in which Ellen, talking to Bobby and Dean and Sam about how so many people died in the roadhouse burning, and she was the only one left alive, and how messed up that was, that she's left standing and all those good people died. And then the camera cuts straight to Dean after he had made his deal with the Crossroads demon.
Yeah.
The implicit meaning there is what we're talking about with survivor's guilt, what one would be willing to do to save others, the ramification of Dean's decision, definitely win. Sam finds that out. It's not stated. It's not obvious to the character's change necessarily within the context of an episode, but it is, again, implicitly implied. That's where the term even comes from. It's implied through what we're saying and the events that are happening, but it is something that other people may argue or get more abstract about. It's a little bit harder to definitively quantify. So, and then the last version that we're going to be talking about is symptomatic meaning, which is essentially the other 3 levels wrapped into one. It's a film's story as well as what it's trying to say. It's what is it all about? What is this entire story trying to say? What is the ideology of the writers behind it or the directing choices? Why would they do the things they did? What are they saying about societal values or family values or the message as a whole beyond what is actually happening, what we're implying through the characters' change and what's happening that we're not talking about, what we're alluding to? And this is essentially, what is all of this wrapped up mean?
And that's typically what I do for you people that listen to my Star Trek podcast or my Doom Patrol podcast. That's typically what I break down in those episodes where it's me and one other person, and we have that type of time where we can really get into.
Star Trek was a great example of, as a show back when it was quality, I would say, of all of these things coming together in a, frankly, weekly basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, for the purpose of this discussion, Thomas, this is what we're going to be looking at for the most part. When we talk about meaning or intent, as we break down Jensen's work as a director, that's what we're going to be focusing on, the symptomatic meaning. So that's why we just went through these levels, so that people can follow along and understand what we're trying to
Right. So if you guys are following along at home, symptomatic is spelled SYMPTOMATIC. So you guys can go ahead and look that up on your dictionary, because we're supposed to
look it up on your dictionary.
We're supposed to have they probably have a computer. They can go to dictionary.com. So we probably should have a thesaurus and a dictionary at home if you guys are listening along.
Why are you trying? Are you Is your implicit meaning that our listeners are stupid?
Yes. Maybe or
bored,
or they're maybe a little above.
And the fact that you can argue that is a great example of implicit meaning,
and that's exactly why I did it.
And Ryan's explicit meaning, in his words,
is
I'm bored. Move on.
Fuck you guys. Can we get
and the reverential meaning is Ryan is stupid.
See, there's an example of all 4.
Yeah, that was way easier. I like Ryan's dumbed down version of our show.
There you go.
It works, though.
So typically when it comes to TV, the directors don't always have a say in a lot of this. This is, like we said, will be more of a showrunner's thing over the course of a whole season. But they are still responsible for taking the script, the direction, the camera work, the actors, and putting all of this and delivering something that will hopefully meet the mark. And this is the distinction between a good director and I would say a weaker one, is if a lot of that meaning, the subtext, the implicit meanings, what it's all trying to say, is lost in translation between writer and director, or if it cuts through and has the impact that was originally intended.
Well, so my ultimate question for this is, obviously we're in season 6, right? So we're 6 seasons in. Jensen is trying his hand at directing for the first time. What percentage do they let him kind of have free reins because he is Jensen, and say, hey, look, we want you to direct this episode. No, nobody's going to be backdoor driving the episode and you're just sitting in the director's seat. I wonder with Jensen how much free rein they gave him on his first episode, as opposed to obviously like he did 6 episodes. So I would say the 5th or 6th when they were just like, So I always wonder about that, because like
it just depends. It depends on the TV show. When you have these types of, I call them vanity directing positions.
Right. This is what we talked about before we went on air. Like,
yeah, typically it's more of a vanity thing. And I'm not saying vanity
it's a
as
credit, right?
Yes, it's a vanity credit. But then you have those people who are trying their hand at directing because it's something they are
passionate about,
or they're thinking of doing more of.
Okay.
And I think in this scenario, Jensen has always had that creative want.
He strikes me as a person who wants to know everything about his craft. Mm-hmm. And his craft is obviously acting, but that whole world of TV shows or movies or whatever he's doing, he strikes me as someone who would want to know, to be a jack of all trades.
And to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, in order to be a good director, you sometimes have to be an actor, or at least understand what it feels and is to be an actor.
Yeah.
So sometimes if an actor is skilled in directing, they tend to be very good at directing because they understand what it means to bring things out, at least from the emotional side when it comes to acting. So I would say on a film set like this, I mean, you got to think Jensen's been already on set for 6 years.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He's been in the TV business, I want to say, for already 15 years plus at this point.
Yeah, at this point, yeah.
He's well aware of what directing entails.
Well, plus I'm sure that we know he had a good relationship with Kim Manners, who was the standout director for the first couple of seasons, and he wouldn't just jump into this completely blind. So I think there have been a lot of times him talking to Kim, talking to other directors, trying to learn as much as he could. So with who he is and how much he's cared would probably determine, and his relationship with Sarah Gamble, do we let him have free reign?
Right.
What do we want him to do?
And that was one of the things, like, because when we cover these shows, because we've been covering shows on the CW for so long, and you always see, well, so-and-so's directing this episode of Arrow or this episode of Flash. And you're like, okay, is this person just doing this to get a credit, or are they doing it because they actually want to try their hand at directing and they're interested in possibly making, once they're done acting, moving into maybe directing? And so that was my... Yeah, and I think that was my biggest question. Like, okay, clearly he liked it. He did it 6 times, right? So, and now we know he's got other things he's working on besides acting. So it's always interesting to me. Like, I always wonder, is this first one, did he get free reign? Did he have to kind of like have someone help him? I always wonder about, and that's obviously that stuff we probably will never know because we're not on set.
I think Thomas hit it on the head. I mean, he had a close relationship with Kim Manners. I think everyone did. And he was a bit of a mentor on that set.
Yeah.
For everyone, even Kripke. He was a mentor to Kripke in a lot of ways. That's why when he died, it hit the entire set so hard.
Pretty hard, yeah.
So I would say Jensen probably learned a lot from watching Manners and the other talented directors on set.
Yeah.
And the thing, too, I think, is if you look at this episode, he clearly had a lot of reverence for the show still.
Right.
So, and I think the fact that it is more of a fun throwaway episode means there's a little bit more freedom if he were to do something a little bit more exaggerated.
I agree, Tom. It's funny. Like, I agree, but I kind of disagree. Like, as a throwaway episode, because you learn it's a world building.
It's a phenomenal world building and Bobby episode, but it does not matter necessarily to the season 6 narrative.
Okay, that's fair.
And that's where I say, quote, throwaway. It's not really like, it's not,
we learned a lot
of other ones that we've
like
had.
You have to remember what we learned in this episode. Like, Mike and I even talked about this before we went on air. This is the first episode they burn Bones to.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's great world building.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of of big breaking
and
things
great
that we
character development. For Bobby.
So even that and Crowley.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Like, that was my big question. Like, I always wondered, like, when you see these celebrities do, I'm directing my first episode of the show I'm on, and you're like, neato, and like, does it really mean anything? But I think
I would say the greatest litmus test on average to me is, did this episode stand out, or was this just another episode?
Yeah.
And it's not just Supernatural. That's anything.
No, that's everything, right?
That had a guest director. So let's take a look at what the episode is saying, and then we'll get into more whether or not Jensen had specific choices that were trying to bring elements to the surface. So, yeah. So, first off, it's clear there are two parallel meanings working together. One that implies the actual narrative that works to bring about consistency to the themes, to the season as a whole, a type of continuity, essentially, that is, I guess, explicit or implicit, depending on your point of view, about the characters. There's the narrative of what's going on with Bobby, who he is as a character, where he's at, the events that have occurred, because this is 4 episodes after the near apocalypse, so there's a lot of stuff that's gone on in his life. And second, there's a more direct meaning motivated by what the audience will engage with, what we're attached to, what we care about. So what this means, essentially, the first meaning is, and this is what we're going to be focusing on a little bit more, is Bobby is a selfless character. He really fucking is. This is where we get to see a lot more of who he is throughout. And I think part of this comes for me when I was rewatching season 2, frankly, most of season 2 and all of Bobby's appearances. But we see him through the lens of Sam and Dean in brief stints for a lot of the show. Not later, he becomes a much larger character, I would say, after seasons around season 2, season 3 and 4. He grows into his own a little bit more. And they even kind of clearly changed how impactful he was to their life as time went on. But we never really saw what he does, what he struggles with, what he goes through. He just flies in, helps the brothers out, and flies out again for a lot of the show in the beginning. So this was on the surface level showing us what he is going through, how he perseveres on a regular basis through incredibly trying times. And kind of this episode to highlight his paternal role in Sam and Dean's life.
Yeah, I think it's important to fully state that thesis in our meanings, because we're going to be going back to that throughout our example. So what is the first meaning? To show Bobby's selfless contributions to the hunting world, his perseverance through emotionally trying times, and to highlight his paternal role in Sam and Dean's life, i.e. providing supportive presence, being available when needed, offering bonded insight, and acting as an informed advocate. That's important to state explicitly so that when we go through our examples, the listeners will then be able to derive meaning from our example and what we're discussing in the way of our definitions of the first implied meaning. Now, the second meaning is, simply put, the episode was a love letter to Bobby Singer, a way to denote fan affection for a character that we have grown to love.
So has Jensen brought across through his directing style all of these aspects of who Bobby is as a character, what he means to Sam and Dean and the show, and also does he do a good job about highlighting and giving Bobby essentially his 15 minutes of fame equivalent?
Yeah.
And as we said, we'll focus on the former. So we're going to look at exactly what scenes may give us some proof to that or lend credibility to Jensen's ability to bring that across.
And there may be none. But as we go through this, we'll see.
So in the very beginning, the first couple of minutes, there's the scene between Crowley and Bobby, which I got to say real quick, it's been a while since I watched this episode. I fucking loved that whole beginning. Crowley's quips are amazing. They have to outthink each other. The Hellhound being there and we're like, oh, Bobby's so smart. Fuck, Crowley's smarter. Damn it. Cut to black. And I'm like, son of a bitch. Like, I miss so much of that thinking out the chess move feeling.
There's so much charisma.
Dude,
that just comes from Mark Sheppard. From the moment he enters that scene, when he snaps his finger just to turn the TV off, there's no reason for him to do that. And yet it adds so much to who he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's little things like that.
I fucking loved that whole bit. But we also have the aspect that we brought up earlier is how this scene is blocked and the pacing throughout that. How is Bobby framed? How is Crowley framed? They are on opposite ends of each other. They keep a distance from each other. They are even little things that you don't think about necessarily. The whiskey's a great example, I feel. The whiskey is not only narratively important because it's a clue that Bobby uses to determine where Crowley is and find the bones, and that's what matters in the end. Something in the first couple of minutes that most people might think Craig, whatever the hell the whiskey's name was, passing comment. But it also shows they won't share a drink together. And this shows the distance between these two characters, not just physically, but they are not friends. They are not allies. They are enemies. Compare that to Dean and Crowley in season 10 and how much change he has gone through. Now, I'm jumping seasons, but the point remains the same. He literally will share a drink with all of them later in his life.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful aspect. It's something that I didn't pick up on until you said, but you're absolutely right, because the blocking is constructed in a very precise way to create or convey an idea of isolation. The fact that Crowley doesn't even drink with Bobby, it actually aids and assists in the idea that Bobby's alone.
Yeah.
That he's all by himself.
Drinking alone, not even a demon's willing to drink with him. And that just adds more impact to everything we're about to go through when it comes to some of these sequences, because a lot of meaning can be derived from blocking, which is a television director's responsibility. Yeah.
How do you block? That is something they absolutely have say in. Sure, the cinematographer will have his input because he's a part of that.
He'll say what looks good, but he doesn't necessarily, quote, care about where the actors move unless it fucks something up.
Right.
You know?
So when we have that scene after Crowley essentially tells Bobby to piss off, Jensen and the cinematographer, they dolly the camera backward as Bobby moves symmetrically into frame. And in the final seconds of the scene, we see Bobby between the doorway of the living room, essentially creating a frame within a frame, which gives off the impression of confinement and isolation, which backs the previous scene where Crowley is refusing to drink with him. So this entire setup is designed to create a moment that we understand what's going to be happening throughout the episode, that this isn't going to be a fun-loving episode where Bobby gets to kick it with the boys. This is him being alone during a time when he probably could benefit from having some of his own emotional support.
Well, what I also like about that is that the episode starts with them on opposite ends of each other. Crowley is right, justified in his wide shots. Bobby's more left, justified. They're literally on the opposite sides of each other. And then when he is alone, like you said, they slowly move him to the center to emphasize that complete isolation.
Yeah. Maybe people don't know what blocking is. Blocking is a very simplistic way of explaining it. It's basically where you position your people in relation to the camera and how the camera's going to move as the subjects move. And the reason why this blocking works to help with meaning, because as our thesis stated, Bobby lives a selfless life, which makes it easy to surmise that Bobby lives a lonely life, single and void of relationships outside of hunting circles. His life is consumed with hunting, filling his duties to the hunting world, and there is no time for personal wants. And there is a subsequent scene that strengthens the meaning of Jensen's chosen camera blocking, and that is the interplay between Bobby and his neighbor, which is also...
So is that
back and forth? Not sexual.
Oh, it's not sexual.
If you want it to be, we can make it sexual.
How does that work?
Well, you enter and then you play.
Oh, okay. I get that one. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I've seen that before, I think.
You enter and then you play.
I've seen that in films.
You can play with Hot Wheels.
It's a different type of film.
Yeah.
Well, gerbils too, right? That'll enter and play.
Holy fuck.
You can enter and play with titties.
Okay. Yeah. I'm starting to understand now.
Okay, cool.
He's got to put it in
This is how you block cameras for porn.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
So like blocking a camera would be like if the male porn star's butt is here and then the girl's here and the butt's like in your focal, right?
Yeah. You ever wonder why all male porn stars, when they're boning a chick from behind, they're slightly to the side?
So you can see
that's proper camera blocking, so you can see him enter and penetrate.
Enter and play.
Yeah, there you go. I just broke down porn.
The implicit aspect is that you don't see his face because nobody wants that.
I don't want to see his face.
Part.
Yeah.
The general demographic being horny men.
That is very observant of you, Thomas.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. It's not until you
see, guys.
Okay, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this.
I'm here to get the real meanings of this stuff. Okay. The ones that really people care about.
Yeah, Jensen was listening. He's all, these guys are good.
These guys know what they're talking about.
These guys are awful.
Wow. He knows all about entering and playing.
So even before, real quick, Mike, even before the neighbor scene, I want to say fan gush moment. I absolutely love the montage of Bobby with the library and figuring out the book. First of all, great music choice, classic Supernatural. But even that shows he doesn't have a Sam and Dean. He doesn't have a buddy to help him out. He has to go break in himself, start his car himself, stay up by himself till 5 a.m. It's more of that isolation still. So when someone finally does show up, his neighbor, it literally catches him off guard, and he doesn't know what to do with that. He's so used to being alone and serving others with the phones and with the research that he doesn't register she's flirting with him. It doesn't do anything for him. He's one track focused on literally everyone else. And so it doesn't come into play. And that not only speaks volumes to what he does, again, on the referential surface level, but this is one of the first scenes that really details the emotional layers at work here. We have through Jensen's, because the director is responsible for the performances. That is their main, well, I would say that is their main responsibility.
It's probably one of their
for TV.
Yeah.
It's probably one of their main responsibilities. And Jensen is able to get Bobby to play completely starstruck, caught off guard, and not registering this. And that comes to light in the fact that he is so isolated that it doesn't register. He is disillusioned, defeated by the idea of even having a chance potentially with someone, with a new relationship, with the change in his routine. It truly doesn't register, and he has a great performance, I think, that helps signify that. It doesn't like when I first watched it, I was always like, dude, what's wrong with you? She's clearly into you. But it's when you look back and understand what they're trying to say here that him being caught off guard, deer in the headlights, makes more sense.
And by having that neighbor come over, it stresses a few points. When she brings the food over, we understand a portion of that symptomatic meaning that we've been discussing. For example, Bobby chooses his paternal and hunting responsibilities over personal desires.
Right.
And that feeds into his disillusioned or defeated mentality when this woman comes over, even though there's a potential for breaking the monotonous hunting responsibilities. But this shows that emotional conflict that interweaves within Bobby's life because, we have that emotional conflict that strengthens Bobby's selflessness. We can deduce through his disillusion that he does in fact have desires that are independent of his responsibilities, and yet he chooses paternal and hunting responsibilities every single time.
I would say at this point, he's not even aware. He's so far removed at this time in the episode.
I'm not saying he's aware that she wants to fuck.
No.
I'm saying aware of any relationship outside of hunting. When two people meet, it doesn't mean he is going to think, oh, hey, she wants to have sex. But the fact that a neighbor came over, let's remove sexual desires completely. When I say desires, I'm not meaning sexual. He has no other desires except the responsibilities of hunting and the responsibilities that he has for Sam and Dean, that he has bestowed upon himself. So when someone comes over who's not a part of that
world,
that social circle, he doesn't know what to do with it. He's completely dumbfounded, confused, because he has no desires outside of his responsibilities.
And that's what I'm saying. I think he's so isolated, so far removed, that it comes across as confusion. Why is she here? He's like, how long have we been neighbors? He's like, literally 6 months. Why are you asking? Like, he's almost like an Asperger's autism level response. Like, this is the definitive. He's been so isolated for so long that human interaction that's not hunter based. What I'm saying is here, it doesn't even click. I think they went extreme obliviousness because later in his subsequent interaction with her, he gets it. And then is immediately resigned.
You want to touch my penis?
And is like he didn't even get it to the point where she had to say, "I lied about the wood chipper to get you here." Yeah, that's when it clicks, and then immediately falls apart.
Yeah, because she's covered in fucking blood and guts.
They went so far to that end. I think it worked, but at first I too was confused. Like, dude, she's into you. What are you doing? Yeah. So I think that is a good example through the performance, being so disillusioned that Jensen did a good job bringing that about to highlight that main thesis statement of Bobby is so tied to this selfless hunter-based lifestyle. Truly, reality around him is irrelevant.
Yeah, there's no room for any other desires, wants, cravings. His life is focused on his immediate responsibilities, which, again, as you said, goes right back to our thesis statement of Bobby being selfless and perseveres through anguish of all types. Even when he could rely on others, he does not. So I think it's fair to say that Jensen did, in fact, convey that through his blocking. I feel like we clearly understand now, as you can tell through listening to me and Thomas go back and forth, that there are different interpretations, but our interpretations still veer right back to the same thesis.
I think the food, the cobbler is another good example. I think Jensen does a good job using props as a tool. Bobby and Crowley don't share the whiskey, shows the distance. She hands him a cobbler, a gift of food. He looks at it like she handed him
a shit sandwich,
like a dead body.
Yeah.
He's like, what is this? What do you want me to do with this? It's not until later that he finally, once the reality has set in and the reward ultimately been lost, does he try to eat it, which is then immediately interrupted.
Yeah, and all of that, you know, it strengthens this idea or this notion that Bobby doesn't know how to function outside of his own version of reality, which, you know, looking at it from a mental health standpoint and deriving meaning from this, his inability to interact in anything leisure or recreational is his biggest problem. It's the reason why he is isolated and he is alone, essentially, because look what happens if you want to contrast these two moments. So you have the neighbor come over with a pie. Blonde woman, attractive. Doesn't
clearly
register.
Into him. Yeah.
Doesn't register. Doesn't even know how to communicate with her. But Rufus comes over with a dead body and it's go time.
Yep. Even Jody Mills with the cop.
Yes.
He knows exactly what to do. He can interact and have a conversation then.
Yeah. And it
because
shows
it's part of that world.
It shows his disconnection from humanity.
Yeah.
And I feel like all of that is implied with Jensen's choices of directing. So when it comes to that portion, would you agree that that's being stated?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then the next part will be a little different. We're going to move into the action sequence, which I know is something that you love about Jensen's directing.
Yeah.
And I will say, just to start things off, that he does have a definitive style when it comes to action. It's very in your face, very visceral. It's very physical. And I'm not saying other directors and other episodes of Supernatural don't do the same thing. They absolutely do. But every episode he directs,
the action is top notch.
Yeah.
And what I think for me really stands out about it is how well thought out it is. Mm-hmm. It is. So it's on a couple of levels. So in the most recent example that we had was the definitively John Wick-esque fight sequence down the hallway, where we see actual military combat aspects put into it. But here in this episode, there's a great moment that for whatever reason, I just love it. When Bobby throws the Okami into the tree, she smacks hard, but he's immediately barrel rolls into her.
He's running with her as he throws. It has momentum. Yes.
It has punch to it. And narratively, it is blocked perfectly because the ultimate device of her destruction, the wood chipper, is behind. This isn't a blurry punch for punch, pull out a sword, stab way too slow for a real stab to kill anything.
Or doing a bunch of cheat blocking so it looks like we're pretty good at action, but we're not really.
Yeah, we can fake it real well.
Yeah.
She is biting at his throat. She claws his face. There is movement. There are things happening that I can visually discern from the movement. It's not, frankly, lazy like so many shows, especially movies, and unfortunately I would say later seasons demonstrate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was visceral, that was suspenseful, that was fucking brutal. Like, I loved it.
And just to compile on that, moving into action and how it connects or relates to suspense, the Okami attacking Bobby in the neighbor's house is an example of that directing style, that visceral aspect that we're talking about, the savage confrontation built on suspense. But that's how you do action. A lot of times people think action is simply fight scene, kick, punch,
gun,
pew, pew.
But how do you create a true action sequence? Well, you got to utilize various filmic conventions. And in this case, they built it on suspense on numerous levels. For example, before the Okami attacks Bobby, there's a delay. This helps build suspense, which is needed because we already know the Okami is probably in the woman's house because a few moments prior, Rufus told Bobby that the previous victims were single white females. That's why Bobby rushes over to the neighbor's house. So there's no secret. We know she's there. So we know what's coming. The Okami offers no real surprise. So in order to create a dynamic scene, tension, built on tension, suspense, they need to connect the sequence to a feeling of dread or suspense. And this is important. This is a very important filmic convention for Jensen to employ, as suspense hinges on a delay in an outcome we are anticipating. For example, the scene makes us wait for what we think and sometimes are pretty sure is going to happen. And in contrast to suspense, and many times interweaved, is the element of surprise, which is absolutely something that they utilize in this moment, which results when the scene leads us to expect one thing and something else happens instead. For example, when Bobby searches the bedroom and finds no evidence of the Okami, we feel slightly relaxed for a moment. And that's why when the Okami comes flying out of a dark corner towards the camera, we are startled.
Well, they do a great job with juxtaposition because Bobby comes in, I got a shotgun, move out of the way. Holy fuck, you know, and then it slows down. There's no sign. And they have a conversation. And we slowly pan over, and then it's all hell breaks loose again. It's this roller coaster of what to expect, which is, you know, traditional in some aspects for horror, of slow pacing, then jump scare if you're lazy ass. But this, we all knew what was going to happen, but it's still effective.
Yeah.
Because it's not just high octane in your face action all the time to where it means nothing.
No, the expectant element, surprise, it works concurrently with the action. And that's why it feels so seamless when we go right into that fight scene. Because when you think about it, the suspense or the feeling of dread that something might happen, even though we're slightly relaxed because there's nothing in the room, because Bobby checked. He checked under the bed. Everything's okay. It got away.
But the other thing,
when it flies through or towards us from the corner, that action, that suspense leads so perfectly into the fight sequence. Literally, it happens so quickly that next thing we know, we're all outside.
Well, and this is I think this entire sequence is a great example of blocking. So this is, I'm having like anger at my work right now because I have a supervisor who doesn't understand film at all, who's in charge. And so we argue, we want to do thought out storyboards, plan our stuff. And he's somebody who just like, yeah, we'll show up with a camera that day. It'll be fine.
So a hack.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. He's a producer through and through who thinks he's a director.
I think he stands for Q.
But this whole sequence is thought out and blocked very, very well. Bobby is right in front of the window, so him getting thrown through the window makes sense. There's the tree and the wood chipper. The wood chipper is alluded to previously in our conversation from the neighbor, and he throws her into the tree. Why throw her into the tree rather than just on the ground? Because then when he goes up against her, she can push back, and he hits the button on the wood chipper, turns it on. New threat has been established. Additional threat. All of it is a dance that is planned out ahead of time. It's not just standing in the hallway, right hook, left hook, right hook, fall down, knife, stab. Like that's what we're talking about when we say blocking and planning and the nuance that goes into some of this stuff.
Yeah, because on top of that,
it escalates within its own scene. It escalates,
and not just because of the action, but because of and not just because of the camera blocking. That seems like something we are definitely talking about a lot because it has a lot to do with what Jensen's trying to convey to the viewer. But there are so many layers of suspense. There's so many levels or layers of additional threats that are unseen because when they go outside, we get this winner takes all type of action. We know someone's going to die. We hope it's not Bobby. We also kind of hope it's not the neighbor because we are holding out hope for Bobby to score.
Slay.
Yeah. And on top of this, there's an additional layer of danger, as you mentioned, because Jensen brings to the sequence that wood chipper that we notice in the background that was supposed to be broken. But then when he falls into it and turns it on, suddenly now we're even more involved in the moment because it brings up that level of danger for our characters.
And this is what I love about Jensen's action sequences. He thinks it through. He likes action, not just for what it does and how cool it looks, but for the story it can tell.
Mm-hmm.
It can be part of it.
Story to tell as a director?
We have the fight scene within the 10 seconds, not even, I don't even think, that it escalates. We have the obvious threat, the Okami, trying to bite and eat and stab him. We have the secondary threat. He might get tossed into a clearly well-functioning wood chipper. And the tertiary threat to the situation. The neighbor ran out, and she could die, either through wood chipper or violence or accident. So Bobby not only has to worry about the immediate threat in front of him, the environmental threat around him, and the protection of an innocent that theoretically we could have an emotional attachment to or a connection to, or he could have an emotional connection to, which he clearly desperately needs. All of these are built upon one another. And you could even make the other argument because of what had previously happened in the episode. There's probably an FBI agent with binoculars staring at you from the highway.
And those are all things that we are, even if we're not thinking about them in an overt sense, subconsciously, we remember all these layers that have been added. We know that FBI agent is lurking about. We know that Rufus just escaped from, wait, had he escaped at that point? No, he hadn't.
No, not yet.
No, not yet.
But we know about the FBI agent and, of course, the other three threat levels you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all things, as you mentioned, that Jensen does so well because they're multi-layered. They're not just the immediate simplistic threats that so many TV shows utilize. It is stacked on top of each other, threat after threat. And there's an argument to be made that I, for one, am finding Jensen's style within this discussion. However, there is an argument to be made that a lot of Supernatural's episodes in the earlier seasons were built on these multi-layer functions that helped propel numerous episodes, because one threat was, let's say 3 threats were introduced into an episode. You deal with one, and then the second one you deal with 2 episodes later, and the third one you deal with at the end of the season. But this episode kind of takes all of that those film techniques that Kripke and his team used for those first 5 years, and they put many of those aspects into the single episode to create this tension.
And, you know, the other thing, too, is that you could make, there's definitely the argument that a lot of this is effective because of the writing of the script. The script had to have wood chipper, Okami threat, neighbor runs out. Presumably, I mean, allegedly they could have had changes, and his shooting script always looks different, but theoretically this was laid out in the blueprint, but he had to be the one to effectively weave all this together. And I think what you said is a good point, is that the earlier episodes did a great job compounding these threats. Yeah. And I think now that we're talking about it, is what I realize is less threatening and impactful about later seasons. Removing so many ancillary characters as the show continued on, especially in its last 2 years, I would say, resulted in the fight scenes being Sam and Dean versus Threat. And I know for damn well that those two are going to be just fine.
Well, you're absolutely right, Thomas, but let's use this specific discussion today to prove you right. Most of the later seasons, particularly the last 3 seasons, were more based on referential meaning. It was rather simplistic.
There was really that's why our discussions got so short.
Well, absolutely. The reason why we went from 2-3 hour discussions to 45-minute to 60-minute discussions on those episodes was because there wasn't enough meaning embedded when you compare it to Carver's run, Gamble's run, and Kripke's run.
Carver's run, dude, I mean, compare how long, and when we talk about implicit meaning and explicit of Dean's journey as a character and what it's really saying when he was overcome by the mark. We spent I think one episode we cut down because we talked for 4 fucking hours.
It felt like it.
About that and what it meant and what it could be. And then you compare some of that to the weaker episodes. I know we shit on this one a lot, but A Most Holy Man, there was nothing to that episode beyond the referential layer. So it's not as compelling.
Yeah. And just bringing it back to this discussion so we can close out here in a bit. When you take all of that, and when you take all the action sequences, I should say, at the end of the entire action sequence, we once again can derive parts of that symptomatic meaning that we have talked about, the thesis, if you will, to show Bobby's selfless contributions, his perseverance through emotionally trying times. This meaning is clear because despite Bobby facing down threats of hell and losing his soul, he rushes in head first to save his neighbor.
He could die and cut his 10 years short to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter to him. It's not even a thought, and this same meaning is backed by his actions as a parental figure with Sam and Dean. When he sits the two of them down and talks some sense into them, that's his rage kind of bubbling to the surface, but Sam ends it with, all you had to do is ask. And he still doesn't even ask. That's not who he is. He's mad that he doesn't get the help, but he's not about to go ask for it necessarily either. And even his conversation with Rufus.
And do you want him though too? That's the beauty of this episode, because this episode shows a martyr's journey, essentially. A man who isolates himself willingly because he puts everything and everyone above himself. And there is no resolve to this. It wasn't about resolve. It was about fleshing out who Bobby is as a person in this hybrid template genre of In a Day of a Life. How's it go?
A Day in a Life.
There we go.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I'm here.
Finally, you pipe in.
But even then, I
fell asleep.
Bobby doesn't ask for help because we don't want him to. It's not until at the end with Sheriff Jody that he says, I'm not good at asking for help.
Yeah.
That's our explicit meaning of his character change, his arc within this episode. Selfless, does everything for everybody else, doesn't want to ask Sam and Dean for help, refuses Rufus's explicit help until the very end, where he has to acknowledge he needs Rufus and he needs Jody.
I just love what this episode does for Bobby in so many ways because of that selfless aspect and the part he plays in Sam and Dean's life. This episode does do wonders in the way of positioning him. As if we didn't know this already, it doesn't matter. It positions him into the
parental figure that he's always been.
Because this is what parents, at least as what people say parents should do. Parents are supposed to be selfless. They're supposed to put their kids above other things. At least that's what I believe. But I like what they're doing with that because they're making that statement. And by doing so, it helps the audience learn so much about Bobby as a character and taking us back to this moment, remembering that this is season 6 and also take into account that we've already had 4 years roughly of Bobby, maybe 5 years of Bobby being a big part of the show.
Yeah, 5 years. Well, 4 in an episode.
Even though they have never been light on Bobby, and they've definitely given us enough episodes to where we understand who this person is, it wasn't until this episode that we fully understood him. That's why this episode stands so high for me, and why I feel like it's an achievement for Jensen as a director, as well as Andrew Dabb and his writing partner, Daniel Laughlin, because they managed to encapsulate or highlight,
capture who he was.
Yeah, capture who Bobby is or was in a singular episode that relied on everything that we've seen before, but just made it more clear and defined.
There's enough to go through from a directing side with all this that we'd be here for quite some time, because that's just what we do.
Yeah.
We have a problem and we're not seeking help for it. We're not.
No, it's a big problem, guys.
But
mostly for Ryan right now.
But there's enough here to try and ascertain whether or not there are enough stylistic markers that make up Jensen's directing techniques, his vision, his style as a whole, I'd say. The one thing that we should touch on that we haven't yet is Jensen does a lot with intimacy. Not like that, Ryan. Because, I mean, there's not only how we see how much of Bobby and Jim Beaver brings to life, his internal emotional struggles, his issues that he's dealing with. We get a sense of the man who is alone on the brink, fighting off damnation on one hand, trying to save neighbors on the other, and with a non-existent third hand, help literally everyone who's ever called or needed help from him. And he gets no thanks or reward, Jack and squat, as he said. And it's hard for us to watch that because it is a very intimate look at this character who, for the longest time, we've only seen as Bobby can do anything. Bobby has the answers. Bobby's who you call when you're in the shit. But I also think from a blocking aspect of what Jensen does, I mean, I still think about Crowley. I think Crowley's the greatest example of how he has his actors move his scenes. When Bobby releases him from the trap, the devil's trap, they get within inches of each other. It's this fucking staring contest, dick measuring contest, who blinks first. He does the same thing with Sam and Dean, him walking between the two of them and telling them to get bent. He has his characters get very, very close because it's an intimidating, personal, intimate moment. It's this same thing that, a kiss between two characters means passion and all this stuff. Here, the anger is brimming at the surface, and it's very threatening. I think about other shows like The Boys, which we talk about all the time now. A character like Butcher or and frankly, any of them really, but getting in your face is an immediate threat. Homelander, getting in your face, taking that step closer, it's invading your space. It's personal. He does that a lot with his style. And I think that is a marker,
especially with the the action sequences.
They're intimate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that might be one of the things that stands out perhaps the most to me. I mean, Mike, for you, what things stood out to you? Have you decided if you feel like he has a style yet? Is it a little too early to tell?
It's a little too early to tell in the ways of thematics, but style, I do feel like we can point to a style. And maybe I'm cheating because I remember his other episodes when it comes to action. But
action's
I feel like
high point.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to stylistic choices, Jensen definitely has a vision that's very clear and it comes through. That I can definitively say after our first episode on Jensen's directing. The other elements, the things that I took away from this specific episode in the way of thematics, paternal, familial, which is kind of the same.
Yeah.
And then overextending oneself, isolation. So keeping that in mind as we move forward into the next discussions about Jensen's directing, we will put these in the show notes as well and see if we could back up,
formulate, and
reinforce
that.
But could we agree that definitely stylistic aspects are there for Jensen?
I would say absolutely. The visceral action is absolutely a high point of what he does, and it's in all of his examples, and it's something he puts a lot of thought into. I would say for me, thematically, or at least tone's not the right word, but the intimacy. He has his.
I would say that's blocking. I would throw it under blocking.
His characters have very deep conversations about what's bothering them. The characters move in ways that are intimate. The fight scenes are intimate. They're not these blurry, and we get through the action. It's all in your face and has a lot heavier meaning because it's personal to them at that moment.
Yeah.
So I think he likes to bring that across, but that's not fully formed yet.
Yeah.
So
I think you might be onto something though.
Yeah.
For sure.
Ryan, do you have anything sexual to add?
No, actually I don't. I think it's too early, at least for me, because obviously like you guys see things that I don't see. So like I do, obviously the action is, up there that's one thing that I would definitely notice. I think it's too early for me. Obviously I remember the episodes, but I don't remember them like visually. So I need to probably see, I would say probably one or two more before I can really make an assessment on like,
I will say, I remember the last one, Atomic Monsters, and this one, because I just rewatched it the most.
So yeah. I think for me, I definitely need to see one or two more episodes before I can actually really make a definitive, like, and I think that goes back to my question of like this being his first episode. Do you have a style the first time you go out, or
I don't think
are you just
do.
feeling yourself out?
And I think you have things that you want to do and that are important to you, but you're not really developed a style yet.
I think it's one of those things too, where like I relate it to like shots and stuff that I do for YouTube. Like I know there's a specific shot that I want, but sometimes I'm like, well, how the fuck do I get that?
Yeah.
And I think it's over time just learning, obviously, like, experimenting and doing your
what
craft.
Works, what doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with this one, I think as his maiden voyage of directing, I feel like maybe he's kind of experimenting a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think where he excels is obviously the action. And maybe we'll see more of that as we do this series. But I think for me, it's one or two more episodes, and then I can really kind of give you an answer on that.
Yeah, same. I mean, I would definitely.
I mean, let's be honest. Like this
it's a great episode, but it's
fucking great episode.
It's hard to tell for sure if it's great because of the writing,
or because of Bobby, or
the acting, or if it's because of Jensen. And honestly, I don't think we could answer that.
I don't think we can pinpoint it. I don't think we can pinpoint it, because as we're watching this episode, it's like you said, Thomas, this was a very big world building episode.
Yeah.
There's things that happen in this episode that change Supernatural going forward. So like it's not only a very important episode, but it's also, so it's written well, it's funny, and it's not funny in a way of like, it's trying too hard to be funny.
It's subtle and well done.
Subtle, funny.
Which I will say is possibly
another aspect
of Jensen's style, because he does put
some humor in his episodes.
Compare it to episodes that don't quite understand, and believe it or not, there are writers that don't understand Dean's characterization and just make him a buffoon.
Right.
But if you look at the humor that's in the episodes that he directs, it's more on par with earlier Dean. It's more subtle humor. It's more funny. Yes.
So let me ask you this. Okay, this is a non-film person question. For someone to direct and then also star, that's got to be even harder than just directing, correct?
That's why he wasn't in it as much. Yeah.
It's right. I would say it depends
on skill level,
and comfort.
Yeah,
more than anything. If the directing is going to take the majority of his brain power, but he knows exactly the performance he wants for himself.
Oh, that
so
makes
I would
sense
say his acting bits would be
that way.
A little bit easier, because you don't have to coach whomever what you want to see for just you.
Yeah, you know what's working for you. What's
exactly.
Not.
Okay.
And you can make your own adjustments.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that part's a little bit easier, but the project as a whole, that's why you're not in it as much, or
that's why him and Sam and Dean weren't in it very much.
Correct.
Okay.
I agree. I think this is one point on a graph. We need another point before we can start making any sort of trends or observations about style.
And now that's not to say that the meaning that we've all just been going over isn't there, because it is. But we don't know if that is
building to something.
Is that
else.
meaning there because Jensen wants to bring that out, or did he bring it out because that's what he focused on in the script?
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right.
Because if we go watch the next episode and there's still this idea of, putting an importance on paternal responsibilities,
selflessness.
Yeah, then we can say, okay, there's something here for sure that Jensen is utilizing. That's not just from the script.
Yeah. So, and again, this is a great episode, so it is a little bit harder to differentiate some of that stuff, but hopefully this has been an interesting conversation for everybody. Hopefully this has given people something different to look at when they rewatch this episode, or when they look at episodes in general, whether it's this episode of Supernatural or any show you're watching or a movie even.
And the reason why I wanted to do this was because a lot of listeners were talking about Ryan's episodes early in the season of our podcast season, and people said they love it. They think it's funny. They die laughing. And they said that they love those breaks. They said, but we do like the technical stuff as well. And I figured, okay, well, we talk about writing a lot. Because in my opinion, that's the foundation of everything. Yeah. If you don't have the blueprint, which is the script, then you can't build shit.
Yeah.
And we don't always get into the directing and what the directing actually entails many times, because most people have this very generic idea of what directing is. Okay, I'm going to call action and then cut.
Behind the camera.
Yeah, there's a lot more involved. So that's why I chose to do this. And I want to do it with Jensen because of the way his direction.
His career trajectory.
The way his career is going.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully people enjoyed this. Let us know what you thought. If there's anything specific that we didn't touch on that you have questions about, or if you're just curious.
More
Ryan, let us know. And please be sure to check out the Patreon and share that with anybody who's a Supernatural fan. All of that does more for us than you guys can imagine. It helps us continue to make content and continue to keep the lights on, because none of this is cheap, and I drove 3 hours for 2 hours of recording, so that's a lot of what we're looking at right now.
We do need that assistance, and also iTunes, please. That's our preferred podcast provider. Obviously, we're pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts, or where you can listen to podcasts, but our preferred is iTunes. We need people to give us reviews and ratings. It's how we justify doing this show. There's two ways: Patreon and iTunes ratings. If you can't contribute to Patreon because your finances doesn't allow $1 or $5 or $10, then I understand that. However, we do have that iTunes that you can help us. We do need that. I know we have like 130, I think, reviews or ratings, and we have 75,000 times that in listeners. So please, if you've never left us a review or a rating, please do so. A rating is preferred at this point. I don't even care about the review. If you don't want to spend time doing a review, we need the ratings because that's what a lot of other companies now look at. And what I mean by companies, because podcast downloads are not public and they can be flubbed and cheated by a lot of people who have been creative out there lately. The best way to gauge the interaction or the popularity of a podcast is by looking at those reviews and ratings. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a catch-22. People don't leave ratings and reviews. I mean, there are big time people that are on iTunes, celebrity podcasts, and they have like 30 reviews, which doesn't add up because people just don't do it. So if you can please give us those ratings, 5-star preferably, it helps us get seen by more people because it triggers algorithms. And also it helps us do more with our show in the future, like going to conventions,
doing more,
continuing to do the show.
Yeah.
So it's all part of the algorithm that we're all slaves to these days, it seems.
Did we mention Patreon? Like the link? We didn't, did we?
No, not. Well, I said so. You share it. But.
Okay, patreon.com/Rayman Digital pledge. And when you do pledge anywhere between $1 to $10 or $12 a month or $15 a month, you actually gain access to additional discussions. With the dollar tier, you gain access to all of our archive shows. Mm-hmm. Shows that we've done years ago that are now being released on Patreon every Monday. We also have a 10 minutes at the Crossroads discussion that comes out on that dollar tier. And then we have a $3 tier where you have access to all of what I just said, in addition to our behind the scenes discussions, like our pre-shows. And then the $5 tier is our podcast tier where you gain access to everything I just mentioned and additional discussions that we do. And of course, our retrospective discussions are available at that $10 tier where we break down past episodes that we get into because we weren't doing these discussions when those episodes aired.
Correct. So if you guys are fans, be sure to share that with anybody you know. We thank you all for listening. We thank you all for anything you guys can do. And we will see you all next time.
You little maggot.
You're no longer part of my penis.
You little maggot. You are no longer a part of this story. Hey, ass butt.